Hello, any and all. Today's video is a little bit different. So this morning at work, I had the opportunity to participate in a TED Talk kind of thing where people could present just about anything that they want. And I gave a talk about my experience so far, moving from only interacting with game development in the context of game jams to actually working on a longer time scale project with Mirama. And if you already work in game development, nothing of what I'm about to talk about is going to be of any interest to you. But still, the talk went well. I wanted to record a version of it for posterity. And if you have not interacted with game development at all, maybe you'll find it interesting and insightful. So let's get started. I started from the very beginning asking the question of what a game is. And to figure that out, I went to Google. And the definition that I got was this one: a complete episode or period of play ending in a definite result. Now, that's not exactly the one that I'm looking for. That's more of the synonym for a match. But these ones from Merriam-Webster and Oxford of activities engaged in for diversion or amusement or entertainment, these are more what I'm looking for. And it shows just how broad of a world games are. It's very hard to define in a neat little box. If you come up with a set of rules for tabletop play, then you've created a game. If you come up with a terminal application that people are going to interact with just for fun, that's essentially a game. And then sometimes within a game you can come up with your own game by forsaking the mechanics of a MMO and just doing role play with other players, erotic or not. So you created your own game there. And really, at least what I find is it's less about figuring if something is possible like as a game idea or concept. It's more in that sea of infinite possibilities of what a game can be, being able to let your brain focus on something long enough in order to get somewhere that's difficult, at least for me. And that's where game jams are especially useful. So what game jams are essentially a challenge that different people give to each other, where in a limited amount of time, that's known at the start, people work on making a new game that fits a theme that's given on day one. And both of these core aspects of what a game jam is super useful in order to actually deliver something at the end. So the deadline makes it so you're able to discard anything that's not realistic. If you only have, let's say, a weekend to work on a game, you're not going to be going for a narrative that spans thousands of years. You're not going to go over super complex RPG-like mechanics. So it forces you to make decisions and come up with ideas that are not too tough to implement. And then the theme allows you to think creatively. Instead of being exposed to just about any possibility and having blank page syndrome, you have this thing to focus on, and then you can think about how to put your own unique twist on that core idea. And both of these aspects together make it so that, game jams are extremely useful for just pumping out cool game ideas. And if you're a boring person like me and you also do management in your day work, then that's pretty similar to what a SMART objective is, in that game jams kind of force you to have objectives that are achievable, realistic, and timely, in a way that just trying to build a game with no framework really doesn't allow you to do. So that's our starting point for today, a game jam that I did back in summer of 2020. So we're at this is the first year of the pandemic. We're in an intense lockdown period, which is a good thing, I might add. But the thing is, I really didn't know if I was going to be able to see any of my friends during that period of time. So I hosted a game jam in that period, and I wanted to use this as an opportunity to at least share an experience together while we couldn't see each other in the flesh. And the theme for that game jam was loss. That was a pretty broad one, and that was a ton of fun. Lots of really cool games came out of that jam, including one, for example, where you have this coin flip minigame at the start, and if you miss a coin flip, then you just lose your coin, and then that's it. You kind of walk home, and you've lost your only distraction, so you just watch someone walk. So that was really funny. And there's also been a platformer where your controls were limited depending on the level, so really cool stuff came out of it. And I did an entry as well for that game jam, and what I did was this dungeon exploration game where your character got weaker after every stage. So after the first stage, you lowered your max HP, and then after the second stage, or for the final stage, you also had lowered sight, and you'd need to use some of your magic in order to be able to see further. And that was kind of one of the way that the theme was implemented. The other one was the narrative. And then I worked on that for a little bit less than 2 months. So it was between June and August that the game jam was running. I kind of delivered my game a week before the deadline. Didn't have any music because I don't know how to compose, but still I was pretty happy with how it came out. And then I figured, okay, I have something that I kind of want to bring to its full potential here. And that's where my game development journey started, coming from that original game jam game. So starting from this, what do we do? Well, to just give an example of why working on any single aspect of the game is much more challenging in a game development prospect than when I worked on a game jam, I'm just going to talk about the dialog box. So when I wanted to add a dialog box to the original Miracles and Magics, I figured that was not the best use of my time, so I just ended up repurposing a dialog box that Oli 414 had built for Pico 8. So that was a decision that I came with just because I felt, okay, my time is limited. I want to make sure that when I work on the game, I'm working on the parts that are more important. So I still want to have a dialog box, but that's not what I'm going to be focusing on. And then I was able to use maybe 30, 45 minutes of my time just tweaking it, for example, to show a sprite, to show who's talking, and then that's it. Move on to something else. Tick that box. When I wanted to add a dialog box to Mirama, then I really had to get into all of the requirements that a dialog box needed to support. And you can iterate essentially infinitely when you have, the infinite space of game development before you. If you have just about as much time as you have on Earth to work on something, then that can easily be an infinite time sink. So I think the dialog box is an example where everything that I ended up adding made sense. So being able to send the dialogue from the dialog box to a dialogue history. If I miss dialogue, I'm always upset. So that's always something that I'm grateful when I see in a game. Taking a smaller core texture and then using a 9-box technique to just stretch it to the dimensions that I want. That was pretty useful because I didn't have to just create a new texture every time I wanted to try again. I don't know if I'll just end up cooking the textures to their final size or not in the final game because they'd still be pretty small textures. The jury's still out on that one, but still useful to implement and stuff like that. So I gave some examples there. Really, that was one of the examples where I think every requirement that I listed ended up being useful for the final product. But for example, really, I could iterate forever. Do I need a new font for the player title? Do I really think that my centering is quite right? Do I want to have different kind of popping up and disappearing animations that are stretch and bounce and stuff like that? I can iterate on any given aspect infinitely, and the challenge is more to be able to say, that's enough, I need to move on to something else. And that's kind of the principal difference that shapes the reason why it's important to give yourself frameworks to work in if you're not working in the context of game jam. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is how do you give yourself the tools in order to be able to reach that finish line? At least these were the tools that I needed, because when I started working on Mirama in 2021, that was fun, building my own engine and moving from, okay, I'm showing a static image to, I'm showing sprite animations, I'm able to move a character, I'm able to show text and stuff like that. Every single bit of progress at first was motivating, but then something happened where the further along in 2021, the less motivated I was to work on the game, because there was never a clear idea in my mind of when this would all like gel and it would all become in my mind a clear path forward to something that would be a game. I felt like I was lost in the weeds. I was able to add, iterate, and constantly improve what I had, but that was not feeling like a game. It was just feeling like a bunch of little features. So I listed some of the threats to making a successful project that I felt I was like falling victim to. So feature creep, just adding more and more and more features, not knowing where you're going, and just not really ever feeling like you have a path to a destination that allow you to say, all right, the game's done, I can release it to the world. And the fact that you're working on the same thing over months and years also made it so I was less and less interested. Late 2021, early 2022, I came very close to dropping Mirama entirely. I was working on it by myself, and I really didn't feel like I was getting any closer to delivering Mirama, so I started even like exploring other hobbies, like doing short stories and stuff like that. And thankfully, these little tricks that I'm going to be talking about have really helped me start feeling good about working on Mirama again, and really feeling like I've got something at last. And yeah, just before we move on, like the reason why it didn't really become a problem until I worked on Mirama is that game jams are short enough where these aspects, feature creep, not knowing where you're going, etc., they were never really an issue. But work on something for months, for years, really these become a problem. So the 3 different things that I found have been really useful. First one being defining a pitch. So I have a couple of games here, and I'm just going to give the pitches that I would give just looking at these games. The Binding of Isaac, it's a procedurally generated permadeath dungeon crawler where you play as a crying child, defeating enemies with the power of your tears. And kind of the 2 aspects that are cool about having a pitch is, for starters, you really get a hook of like what the game does differently. And if you think back of what I said about game jams, having that unique twist on that theme is a pitch. And here it's like the aspect of course, playing as a crying child, but also like having that core mechanical identity makes it so that you're able to inform your decisions during game development based on that pitch. So if you're building like this permanent dungeon crawler where you need to start from the very beginning, you're gonna make decisions on what you're gonna be building to make that process less frustrating for players, like having permanent unlocks or having a wide variety of items so that no single game feels identical to a previous one. I also gave the example of Splatoon. It's a kid-friendly take on online shooters, so it informs a lot of decisions about making the game colorful, making maybe wider weapons because it focuses more on covering terrain than on killing any given enemy, like playing on the opposite squad. And then really the reason why I'm talking about pitches is that when I started working on Mirama, if I wanted to talk about what my game was, it looked a little bit like this, and that is something to avoid. So I'm not fully satisfied with the state of my pitch right now, which is that it's a pacifist bullet dodging game where we bring an end to the era of magic, but it is still a lot clearer than what I had. And I've already been able to use that core pitch in order to make decisions when working on the game. So for starters, when I was working, I'm still working on Chapter 1, the first design that I had for it was that on the second layer of exploration that you're going to be traveling through, I would make it like an exploration kind of stage where you'd have 4 different branches to explore because the religion of the temple that you're exploring kind of has this fixation on the number 4, and then as long as you explore 3 of the 4, then you're able to move on to the next layer. And then I had like one that was about puzzles, one that was about survival, one that was about racing, and one that was about just linear dungeon exploration like the rest. But then something felt off about the pacing, and just thinking about back to that pitch kind of helped me to decide what I didn't really like about it, which was if you, for example, go from puzzles to the racing area, then that was 2 sections in a row well, you didn't interact with the core identity of the game, which was about dodging bullets. So I ended up scratching that idea, even though it made thematic sense for that stage. And now I just have the second layer be about, two different options that you need to travel to. And you need to do both, but one's a bullet dodging survival experience and the other is the puzzle experience. To at least give some variety, but without distracting too much from that core pitch. And then also something that was useful from defining that pitch is that it kind of gave me a core identity to the bosses that you're going to be fighting, in that they're going to be people that currently benefit from the current era. So that's why you're naturally in opposition to them. So having that core pitch is already useful in order to start making decisions and take away some of the indecisions that are going to be facing when you're designing a game. At least so far, that's been helpful to me. Second one, task management. So of course, at the office, we use Jira. And for some reason, when I started working on Mirama, I didn't really give myself any tools to prioritize tasks, and that was a huge mistake. So right now I'm using Trello. It can be really anything. It could be just IRL post-its if you want. But the thing is, you want to have a way to, for starters, note down what good ideas, or at least potential ideas, you've thought about, so that you can return to them in the future without wasting time thinking about, oh, what was that thing I was thinking about a week ago? But also not context switch all the time. Like, one of the bad patterns that I could get into is just having an idea and figuring out, okay, well, I'm just going to do it right away because otherwise I might forget about it. Even if I took like notes in a notebook, that's less convenient to get back to later on. So I would just switch to whatever newest idea I had in mind. And that was a big part of why I didn't feel like I was building towards anything meaningful. So these two elements really helpful in order to just get progress that feels meaningful and also naturally reject ideas that aren't constructive. And beyond that, it's just kind of nice to be able to see what tasks you've already accomplished, right? It feels good to see tasks disappearing from the to-do list. So definitely give yourself a framework to prioritize tasks. That is super useful, at least if you're thinking like me. And the third part that was really helpful for me, and that one is really, really recent, it was asking for feedback. So my first round of actually letting people play the game was just this October. So I, sent to a few people that I trust a playable build that included a very small section of the game. So the playable HUD, and then also a boss battle, a prototype boss battle. And that was it. So it's a very short game, but at least already feedback came pouring in about what people liked, which, is a good feeling, and people didn't like as much. And that is also great because it allows me to think about these areas and, give me visibility on things that I could improve and not just rely on my intuition. So really asking for feedback is tremendously helpful, right? And I waited way too long before doing that, and that was a mistake. And beyond just having, constructive feedback that I can use to improve the game, just, keeping in mind that you're going to be sharing that game to other people kind of forces you to keep the game in a shareable state and not have too much work in progress at once, which is not nothing. It's really helpful. So yeah, having these three key tools have really helped me move from not feeling like I was going anywhere with Mirama to a state where I feel like every week I'm making meaningful progress and I'm able to get to a state where the first stage is going to be most likely playable from A to Z by the end of the year. And that is pretty significant to me. So that's that. As a small aside, that's not really a tool, but that's something important to keep in mind if you can avoid doing work, especially if it's your first experience working on a game. I cannot recommend it enough. In my case, I ended up building my own engine because I figured, well, in the context of my day job, I code. So I'm just going to do something that allows me to keep at it using straight C#. So I ended up using the monogame framework. And That felt at the time like the best way to get progress done quickly, but that was like taking a loan, in that I needed to put a lot more effort down the road just in order to match features that if I just learned another engine, I would be able to leverage much more quickly. There are tons of good reasons to build your own engine, and I'm not trying to discredit any of that, especially if you're someone with experience, being able to own your full code stack, there's something to it. What I'm trying to say is if you're able to avoid work in the long term, then taking like that longer amount of time, like work in the short term, is going to pay dividends. And that doesn't have to be necessarily just learning an engine before you start working a game. It can be any kind of tool that you build for yourself in order to avoid redundant work. And just keep that in mind, essentially. Try to find ways in order to work smarter and not more. Here I have a few examples of engines that you can take a look at and learn, and some successful games that have been built using them. So I have a Hat in Time for Unreal Engine, I have Inscription for Unity, Katana Zero for GameMaker, and Log Be a Landlord for Godot. There's a ton more engines out there, so essentially it doesn't have to be engines, but just keep in mind if you can avoid work that's repeated, if you can avoid work in the long term, then maybe that's something that's worth doing. So yeah, that was kind of the tricks that I gave myself in order to actually be productive while I'm working on Mirama. And now the state of the game is much better. As I said, first stage looking likely for this year, which is great in and of itself. And then it's not looking likely that the other stages will be done by the end of 2023, just because, well, that's a part-time thing that I do and I don't want to burn myself out. But 2024, I'm giving myself the objective that in 2024, I would launch Mirama onto a storefront. So it's looking realistic now, thanks to these tools that I've given myself to succeed. And it all goes back, I think, to that Google definition I was so quick to dismiss at the very beginning. So, a complete episode or period of play ending in a definite result. Ending in a definite result, right? I think that's very important, not necessarily for the player, but for the creator. The part where a game stops being just a pet project, an idea in your head, and it truly becomes a game, is when it's in the hand of people that interact with it for the purpose of entertainment. And until you can reach that point, then it's not a game yet. But when people can finally play it, then it becomes its true form. It evolves into something that is truly magical. From the moment they hit start until the moment they read, "Thanks for playing." That's all I had. So hopefully that was interesting, fun to you, and I hope you have a great day.